When we look back at Hollywood's golden age, we often focus on the glamour, the talent, and the legendary performances, but behind the silver screen magic was a financial reality that would astonish even today's highest-paid stars. The wealth accumulated by certain actors during this era wasn't just impressive, it was dynasty-building, empire-creating, and in some cases nation-financing wealth that has largely been forgotten by history. What people don't understand is that these weren't just rich celebrities by today's standards. A Hollywood financial historian revealed, some of these stars had fortunes that would be worth billions in today's money. They weren't just wealthy, they had the kind of wealth that typically only belonged to industrial magnates and banking families. Today, we're counting down the 13 richest actors from Hollywood's golden age, revealing not just their staggering fortunes, but the surprising, shocking, and sometimes scandalous ways they built and managed their wealth. From secret investment empires to tax schemes so creative they changed American law, these stars weren't just talented on screen, they were financial geniuses behind the scenes. And prepare to be stunned by number 3, a star whose financial maneuverings were so ahead of their time that financial experts still study their methods today. Yet this name rarely appears on any wealth rankings because of how thoroughly they concealed their true net worth from both the public and the government. But before we start, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We're uncovering Hollywood's hidden financial secrets, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Now let's dive in.
Ask you who is the greatest dancer, so I won't. Who is the biggest klutz, though? Of those?
Number 13. Fred Astaire. $10 million, $210 million today. When most people think of Fred Astaire, they picture the elegant dancer gliding across the screen with Ginger Rogers. What they don't realize is that behind that seemingly effortless grace was one of Hollywood's shrewdest business minds, a man who turned his dancing feet into golden investment opportunities. A financial analyst who specializes in celebrity wealth explained, Astaire wasn't just earning money from films, he was multiplying it through investments that showed remarkable foresight. While most stars were buying mansions and jewelry, Fred was quietly acquiring massive real estate holdings throughout California. By the 1940s, Astaire had already amassed a fortune of approximately $10 million from his film career and Broadway performances. But what made his wealth truly exceptional was where he chose to invest it. A real estate historian revealed he bought huge parcels of land in what would eventually become Beverly Hills and Bel Air when it was still considered worthless scrubland. Property that he purchased for pennies per acre eventually became some of the most valuable residential real estate in the world. Astaire's business acumen extended beyond real estate. He was among the first Hollywood stars to create branded dance studios, establishing the Fred Astaire Dance Studios in 1947, which grew into a franchise operation with hundreds of locations that continues to generate millions in revenue today, long after his death. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Astaire lived relatively modestly compared to his wealth. His primary indulgence was his horse racing stable, but even this was run as a profitable business rather than a wealthy man's hobby. By the time of his death in 1987, Astaire's investments had multiplied his Hollywood earnings many times over. A biographer who studied his financial records noted, what made Astaire's wealth particularly impressive was how methodically he built it. This wasn't inherited money or lucky gambling, it was calculated investment from a man who understood that fame was temporary, but prime California real estate would only increase in value.
Of course not. Everybody comes to Italy in summer.
Yeah, sometimes you even see.
Number 12. Clark Gable, $15 million, $32 million today. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, with a net worth of $15 million, equivalent to about $320 million today. Clark Gable's financial empire was as impressive as his on-screen presence. What distinguished Gable's wealth, however, was not just its size, but its strategic diversification across industries that had nothing to do with entertainment. A financial historian who studied his investments explained, Gable approached wealth building like a general planning a campaign. By the mid-1930s, he was already allocating his film earnings across multiple industries, oil exploration in Texas, cattle ranching in Arizona, and commercial real estate throughout California. After his role in Gone with the Wind made him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood, Gable invested his record-breaking salary in what would prove to be his most lucrative venture, early stakes in multiple defense contractors, just before World War II. A business analyst familiar with celebrity investments of the era noted, his timing was either incredibly lucky or surprisingly prescient. Gable bought significant positions in aircraft manufacturing companies in 1939 to 1940, just before these stocks exploded in value during the war. Some of these investments multiplied 30 times over within 5 years. By his death in 1960, Gable had accumulated approximately $15 million, equivalent to about $320 million today, a fortune made more impressive by his humble beginnings as the son of an oil well worker and the significant portion of his wealth he lost in his divorce from his second wife Maria Langham. Gable's biographer observed, Gable's approach to wealth reflects his Midwestern practical mentality. Unlike stars who invested in glamorous but risky ventures like restaurants and nightclubs, Gable chose boring but lucrative industries: oil, cattle, defense, timber. He once said, "I don't need my investments to be exciting. I get plenty of excitement in front of the camera." This pragmatic approach to wealth building created a fortune that continued to grow even during Hollywood's leaner years and economic downturns that affected the film industry, insulating Gable from the financial instability that plagued many of his contemporaries.
One can pyramid simple facts into wild fantasies, isn't it? We all do it, don't we, Philip?
Number 11. James Stewart. With a net worth of $18 million, equivalent to approximately $380 million today, Jimmy Stewart's on-screen persona as the everyday American everyman couldn't have been further from his off-screen reality as one of Hollywood's most financially sophisticated investors, with particular expertise in aviation and high-risk insurance markets that built a fortune far beyond his acting earnings, an aerospace industry historian explained. Stewart wasn't just a pilot in real life. He was a major aviation investor who recognized growth opportunities in commercial flight long before Wall Street caught on. His military background gave him insights into which aircraft technologies had civilian applications, and he invested accordingly. Following his service as a bomber pilot in World War II, Stewart used his understanding of aircraft to make early investments in commercial aviation stocks that would multiply many times over during the post-war travel boom. But his true financial genius emerged in a much more esoteric area: specialized insurance markets. A financial journalist who studied celebrity investors revealed, few people know that Stewart was a gifted mathematician with a particular talent for actuarial calculations. He became fascinated with insurance markets, particularly high-risk policy areas like coverage for film productions and aviation ventures. This interest led to his most lucrative investment, becoming a major stakeholder in an insurance company specializing in entertainment industry policies. When this company was eventually acquired by a larger firm in the 1970s, Stewart's initial investment had multiplied more than 70 times. By his death in 1997, Stewart had accumulated a fortune estimated at $18 million, equivalent to approximately $380 million today, a sum made more impressive by his reputation for living frugally despite his wealth. His 5-bedroom house in Beverly Hills, purchased in the 1940s, was modest by Hollywood standards, and he drove the same Volvo for nearly 2 decades. A business analyst noted, what distinguished Stewart's wealth was that he built most of it outside Hollywood. His acting income was just seed capital for his investments. By the 1960s, he was earning far more from his investment portfolio than from his film appearances, giving him tremendous artistic freedom to choose roles based on interest rather than paycheck.
What came between us?
Number 10. Barbara Stanwyck, with a net worth of $20 million, equivalent to about $430 million today. Barbara Stanwyck's transformation from Brooklyn orphan to one of Hollywood's wealthiest women is perhaps the most dramatic rags-to-riches story of the Golden Age, and one built on financial strategies so forward-thinking that modern celebrities still use her blueprint today. An entertainment attorney specializing in celebrity finances explained, Stanwyck literally wrote the playbook on how actors could use corporate structures to protect and multiply their wealth. Decades before it was common practice, she established one of the first loan-out corporations that contracted her services to studios, allowing her to be taxed as a business rather than as an individual at much higher rates. This tax strategy, revolutionary when Stanwyck implemented it in the late 1930s, allowed her to retain a much larger percentage of her earnings than contemporaries who were losing up to 90% of their salaries to income tax during World War II. She used this preserved capital to make investments that would multiply her wealth many times over. A financial historian who studied her portfolio revealed, Stanwyck had an almost supernatural instinct for value investing. She was buying blue-chip stocks during the Depression when even sophisticated investors were fleeing the market. Her portfolio included early positions in IBM, General Electric, and Coca-Cola, purchased when these stocks were at historic lows. Unlike many stars who focused on glamorous California real estate, Stanwyck made contrarian investments in industrial and agricultural properties throughout the American West. Her most lucrative purchase was a 96-acre cattle ranch in the San Fernando Valley that she bought in 1941, land that would later be developed into prime suburban real estate as Los Angeles expanded after the war. Her biographer noted, she purchased that ranch because she genuinely loved horses and cattle operations, but her childhood poverty had given her an instinct for recognizing undervalued assets. She would often say, land near a growing city is like money in the bank. They aren't making any more of it. By the time of her death in 1990, Stanwyck had accumulated approximately $20 million, equivalent to about $430 million today. A fortune made more impressive by the fact that unlike many on this list, she came from absolute poverty and had no formal education or family connections to guide her financial decisions. Before we continue with our countdown, if you're enjoying these incredible stories about Hollywood's hidden fortunes, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. We're about to get to the truly shocking entries on this list, including number 3, which will absolutely blow your mind. The wealth strategies these stars used are still studied by financial experts today. Don't miss what's coming. Subscribe now and let's continue. Number 9. Cary Grant. $30 million today. Cary Grant, with a net worth of $30 million, equivalent to about $650 million today. Cary Grant's facilitation wasn't limited to his on-screen persona. Behind his debonair image was a financial mastermind who built one of Hollywood's greatest fortunes through a combination of contractual innovation and technology investments that demonstrated extraordinary foresight. An entertainment lawyer who studied his contracts explained, Grant revolutionized how stars were paid by essentially inventing the percentage deal that actors still use today. In 1936, when studios paid even their biggest stars flat salaries, Grant negotiated a deal with Columbia that paid him a modest upfront fee but included 50% of the film's profits. Studio executives thought they were getting a bargain. They were wrong. This profit participation model, which Grant pioneered and then refined throughout his career, ultimately generated exponentially more income than traditional salary arrangements. For his role in To Catch a Thief alone, this structure earned him approximately $700,000 instead of the $100,000 flat fee he had been offered, a seven-fold increase. But Grant's financial acumen extended far beyond his film negotiations. He was among the first Hollywood figures to recognize the investment potential of emerging technologies, particularly television, when most movie stars still viewed the medium with contempt. A business historian who tracked his investments revealed, while other stars were refusing to appear on television to protect their cinematic mystique, Grant was quietly buying stock in television manufacturing companies. He made early investments in Motorola and Magnavox when television was still considered an uncertain technology, correctly anticipating the post-war boom in home entertainment. His most lucrative investment, however, came through his friendship with Howard Hughes, which gave him early access to pharmaceutical and aviation stocks that would multiply many times over during his lifetime. Grant's biographer noted, Grant had this remarkable ability to separate his assessment of people's business ideas from his personal feelings about them. He found Hughes personally difficult but recognized his business brilliance and invested accordingly. This emotional detachment from his investments served him extremely well. By his death in 1986, Grant had accumulated approximately $30 million, equivalent to about $650 million today, a fortune made more impressive by his retirement from acting in 1966, meaning his wealth continued to grow for 2 decades without film income. He once remarked to a friend, "I may have stopped performing, but I never stopped working. Money works even when you don't."
Oh, I have to be with you.
You just want...
Claudette Colbert, with a net worth of $35 million, equivalent to about $750 million today. Claudette Colbert's elegant screen presence masked one of Hollywood's most tactically brilliant financial minds, a woman who outmaneuvered studio heads and built a vast real estate empire while maintaining a public image of feminine sophistication that never hinted at her business acumen. A film historian who studied her career negotiations explained, Colbert perfected the art of making ruthless business moves while appearing completely charming throughout. In 1934, she was contracted to Paramount for $25,000 per film, but when Frank Capra specifically requested her for It Happened One Night at Columbia, she demanded and received $50,000 for 1 month's work, an unprecedented inter-studio loan fee. She won an Oscar for the role, which then allowed her to renegotiate her Paramount contract for $150,000 per film. This strategic salary escalation made her one of the highest-paid individuals in America during the Great Depression. But Colbert's financial genius truly emerged in how she invested these earnings, focusing on commercial real estate rather than the residential properties favored by most stars. A real estate historian familiar with her portfolio revealed, while her contemporaries were building mansions in Beverly Hills, Colbert was quietly acquiring office buildings in downtown Los Angeles, Manhattan, and Chicago. She had an extraordinary talent for identifying properties with redevelopment potential, particularly aged buildings in prime locations that could be modernized. Her most lucrative investment came in the late 1940s when she purchased a struggling office complex in downtown Chicago that was losing tenants to newer buildings. Rather than following conventional wisdom and converting it to a different use, Colbert financed a complete modernization, including one of the first centrally air-conditioned office spaces in the city. The renovated building's value increased nearly tenfold within a decade. A business associate from that period noted, Colbert approached real estate with the same meticulous attention she brought to her film roles. She would personally inspect properties, review tenant lists, and analyze neighborhood development patterns before making decisions. She wasn't investing as a passive celebrity, she was operating like a professional developer. By her death in 1996, Colbert had accumulated approximately $35 million, equivalent to about $750 million today, a fortune made more impressive by her lifelong rejection of flamboyant displays of wealth. Despite her enormous holdings, she lived primarily in a modest New York apartment, explaining to friends, "I don't need to impress anyone. The properties I own are my business, not my identity."
If a man's crazy just because he plays the tuba, then somebody better look into it because there are a lot of tuba players running around loose.
Number 7. Gary Cooper, with a net worth of $40 million, equivalent to about $850 million today. Gary Cooper's stoic Western heroes projected straightforward American values that contrasted sharply with his sophisticated approach to wealth building, an investment strategy centered on natural resource acquisition that created one of Hollywood's largest personal fortunes. A historian specializing in celebrity investments explained, "Cooper didn't just play Western characters, he used his film earnings to become a genuine Western land baron. Beginning in the late 1930s, he began systematically acquiring struggling ranches throughout Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, properties that were land-rich but cash-poor during the Depression. While these purchases initially appeared to be hobby investments of a star indulging his love of the outdoors, Cooper had identified something most investors overlooked. These properties contained vast, untapped mineral rights that would become enormously valuable in the post-war industrial expansion. A natural resources attorney familiar with Cooper's holdings revealed, what looked like overpaying for scenic ranch land was actually a brilliant play for the resources beneath the surface. He was acquiring copper, coal, and later uranium rights at fractions of pennies on the dollar because the surface landowners had no capacity to develop these resources themselves. Cooper partnered with mining companies to develop these resources through complex agreements that maintained his ownership of the underlying assets while generating substantial royalty streams. This approach allowed him to profit enormously from America's post-war industrial expansion without taking on operational risks. A financial historian noted, he structured his resource investments with remarkable sophistication. Rather than selling his mineral rights, he created tiered royalty arrangements that included escalator clauses tied to commodity prices. When copper prices soared during the Korean War, his royalty revenue multiplied accordingly. Beyond natural resources, Cooper made prescient investments in early aviation and telecommunications infrastructure, focusing on Western states where regulatory hurdles were lower and development costs were more affordable than in densely populated regions. By his death in 1961, Cooper had accumulated approximately $40 million, equivalent to about $850 million today, a fortune made more impressive by his reputation for personal frugality, despite his wealth. Associates recalled that despite owning multiple ranches and properties, he drove the same Jeep for nearly 15 years, explaining, "It still works fine. Why would I need another one?"
Still have the feeling that you wanted to say, you know, it was right, wasn't wrong.
Number 6. Jimmy Durante. With a net worth of $50 million, equivalent to about $1.1 billion today. Jimmy Durante's distinctive voice and comical nose made him one of Hollywood's most recognizable personalities. But few suspected that behind his lovable everyman persona was one of the entertainment industry's most sophisticated financial operators, a man who built a billion-dollar fortune through investments so diverse and complex that even today historians struggle to map his complete portfolio. A financial journalist who investigated his holdings explained, "Durante created this perfect misdirection with his public persona. While audiences saw this rough-around-the-edges comedian with his mangled syntax and rumpled appearance, behind the scenes he was operating what amounted to a private equity firm, decades before such things formally existed. Unlike most stars who relied on business managers or studio financial advisors, Durante personally directed his investments with a level of engagement and expertise that surprised even veteran Wall Street operators who dealt with him." A former business associate revealed, he had this remarkable ability to identify industries on the verge of transformation. In the late 1940s, when television was still finding its footing, Durante didn't just invest in TV production companies like most forward-thinking entertainers. He invested in the coaxial cable manufacturers and transmission equipment suppliers that made television broadcasting physically possible. This pattern of identifying infrastructure and supply chain opportunities rather than more obvious consumer-facing businesses characterized Durante's investment approach. His portfolio included everything from hotel laundry services to aircraft parts manufacturing to specialized chemical companies producing materials needed for film development. An economist who studied celebrity fortunes observed, Durante understood something fundamental about wealth creation that most people miss. He recognized that for every highly visible business success, there are dozens of supporting industries making less glamorous but often more reliable profits. He systematically invested in these background players across multiple industries. His most lucrative investments came in post-war suburban infrastructure development. Rather than purchasing residential real estate directly, Durante invested in companies providing water lines, electrical substations, and sewage systems to newly developed communities, essential services that generated steady regulated returns regardless of property market fluctuations. By his death in 1980, Durante had accumulated approximately $50 million, equivalent to about $1.1 billion today, a fortune made more remarkable by his generous philanthropic giving, particularly to children's charities, which might have made him even wealthier had he reinvested those funds. A longtime friend recalled, he used to say, "Duh nose." People thought it was just another self-deprecating joke about his nose. But those close to him understood it was actually his subtle reference to his uncanny instinct for finding opportunity where others saw nothing special. Number 5. Jack Benny, with a net worth of $55 million, equivalent to about $1.2 billion today. Jack Benny built his comedy career around playing a penny-pinching miser who hoarded his wealth and agonized over every expenditure. The supreme irony, and one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets, was that the real Benny was actually building one of the entertainment industry's greatest fortunes through investment strategies, so innovative that business schools still study them today. An entertainment historian specializing in radio and early television explained, Benny created the perfect cover with his on-screen persona. While audiences laughed at his fictional cheapness, he was pioneering entertainment ownership structures that transformed how wealth was created in Hollywood. In 1948, when most radio stars were still employees earning salaries, Benny established one of the first entertainment production companies, Amusement Enterprises, that owned and produced his radio show rather than simply performing as talent. This revolutionary approach meant that he owned the intellectual property, distribution rights, and rerun potential of his content, assets that would prove far more valuable than any performance fees. A media business analyst noted, this ownership model was transformational. When Benny moved from NBC to CBS, he wasn't just changing employers like other stars, he was licensing a product he owned to a new distributor. This distinction allowed him to negotiate a $2 million payment structured as a capital gain taxed at 25% rather than income taxed at 90%, instantly protecting enormous value that his contemporaries were losing to taxation. Beyond his content ownership innovation, Benny displayed extraordinary foresight in his investment choices. In the 1950s, he began systematically acquiring telecommunications infrastructure, particularly radio transmission towers and early broadcast equipment manufacturing facilities. A telecommunications historian explained, Benny recognized that regardless of which shows succeeded or which networks thrived, the physical infrastructure of broadcasting would remain essential and valuable. He was essentially investing in the picks and shovels of the entertainment gold rush rather than prospecting for hits himself. His most lucrative investment came in the early 1960s when he established one of the first equipment leasing companies specializing in television production gear. This business purchased cameras, lighting, and sound equipment, then leased them to studios and production companies, generating both steady revenue and substantial tax advantages through depreciation. By his death in 1974, Benny had accumulated approximately $55 million, equivalent to about $1.2 billion today, a fortune made more ironic by the generous, big-spending personality that contradicted his frugal on-screen character. Unlike his penurious persona, the real Benny was known for exceptional philanthropy and lavish gift-giving, particularly to young performers facing financial hardship. A longtime friend recalled, the greatest joke of Jack's career was that millions of Americans thought he was pathologically cheap. Meanwhile, he was quietly building a billion-dollar empire and giving away more money than most of his supposedly free-spending contemporaries.
No, I've been mad about you from the first time I laid eyes on you. Well, you're my whole world. What do you want to do?
No, I'll call you a text.
Number 4. Mae West, with a net worth of $60 million, equivalent to about $1.3 billion today. Mae West's sultry screen persona and boundary-pushing sexuality made her one of Hollywood's most controversial stars, but behind her provocative image was one of the entertainment industry's most brilliant business minds, a woman who leveraged her understanding of intellectual property and real estate to build a fortune that dwarfed her substantial performance earnings. An entertainment lawyer who studied her contracts explained, West wasn't just ahead of her time artistically, she was decades ahead in her approach to entertainment as a business. In 1932, when female stars were considered lucky to be paid anything close to male counterparts, West negotiated a Paramount contract that included not just profit participation, but script approval, director consultation, and most importantly, ownership of her personal brand and image rights. This unprecedented control over her creative output allowed West to build wealth in ways her contemporaries couldn't imagine. Rather than relying solely on studio salaries, she wrote her own scripts, receiving separate compensation as a writer and retained publishing rights to her most famous one-liners and quips. A copyright attorney familiar with her estate noted, "She understood her value wasn't just as a performer, but as a creator of intellectual property." When other actresses were earning only performance fees for work owned entirely by studios, West was building a portfolio of copyrights, catchphrases, and character elements that generated royalties for decades. But West's financial genius truly emerged in her real estate investments. Using her film earnings during the Depression, she systematically acquired apartment buildings throughout Los Angeles at distressed prices, focusing particularly on properties in Hollywood and the emerging Westwood neighborhood near UCLA. A real estate historian who tracked her property portfolio revealed West had an extraordinary vision for demographic trends. She specifically bought buildings suitable for housing entertainment industry workers, recognizing that regardless of which studios or productions succeeded, people working in entertainment would need places to live near the industry's geographic center. Her most lucrative investment came in the early 1950s when she purchased a 6-block section of commercial real estate in Las Vegas, just off the Strip. While initially appearing to be a poor location compared to the prime Strip properties, the area became critically important when Vegas expanded, making West's holdings some of the most valuable commercial real estate in the city. By her death in 1980, West had accumulated approximately $60 million, equivalent to about $1.3 billion today, a fortune made more remarkable by the fact that she achieved it as a woman in an era of extraordinary gender discrimination, particularly in financial and real estate sectors. A business associate recalled, West used to say, "I believe in censorship. I've made a fortune out of it." People thought she was just talking about the publicity from her banned plays and controversial films. In reality, she was referring to her understanding that creating valuable intellectual property often meant pushing boundaries, and that such boundary pushing often created assets of enduring value.
Yes, it's tremendously so. You see, it was so visual in those.
Number 3, Harold Lloyd. And this is the shocking entry, Harold Lloyd, with a net worth of $75 million, equivalent to about $1.6 billion today. While Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton are more frequently remembered today, their silent film contemporary Harold Lloyd built a fortune that eclipsed both of them combined, creating wealth so vast and so carefully concealed that financial historians are still uncovering the full extent of his empire more than 50 years after his death. A business historian who gained access to his private records revealed, Lloyd's financial achievements make his film success look almost modest by comparison. While his contemporaries were focused on maintaining their artistic reputations and lavish lifestyles, Lloyd was methodically building what amounted to a shadow banking operation that financed much of Hollywood and Southern California's development without most people even knowing of his involvement. Unlike most stars who relied on the studio system, Lloyd established his own production company in 1921, granting him complete ownership of his films and their distribution rights. This independence allowed him to retain approximately 85% of the profits from his movies, an unheard-of percentage at that time. An entertainment finance expert explained, Lloyd wasn't just a successful actor-producer. He was effectively operating as a vertically integrated studio without the overhead and infrastructure costs that weighed down the major studios. This lean approach meant his profit margins were extraordinary compared to industry standards. But Lloyd's true financial genius emerged after the 1929 stock market crash when he began systematically deploying his liquid capital into distressed assets throughout California. Unlike most investors who focused on stocks or urban real estate, Lloyd specialized in agricultural properties and water rights, assets whose fundamental value was often obscured during financial panic. An agricultural historian noted, in a 3-year period starting in 1930, Lloyd acquired over 150 agricultural properties throughout California's Central Valley. These weren't trophy investments. They were meticulously researched purchases focused on properties with secure water rights, which he correctly identified as the true source of long-term value in Western agriculture. Lloyd's most spectacular investment came in 1938 when he established a specialized financing firm, providing loans to independent film productions that had been rejected by traditional studios. This venture, operating quietly through a network of holding companies that obscured Lloyd's involvement, essentially created an alternative financing system for films the major studios deemed too risky. A film financing expert explained, Lloyd was effectively operating a specialized venture capital firm decades before such entities became formalized. He provided capital to projects rejected by studios for being too controversial, experimental, or outside mainstream tastes. When these films succeeded, which they did with surprising frequency, his returns were exponentially higher than traditional film investments because he was filling a financing void no one else would touch. By his death in 1971, Lloyd had accumulated approximately $75 million, equivalent to about $1.6 billion today, a fortune made more extraordinary by how successfully he concealed its true extent. Even close associates remained unaware of many of his holdings, which were distributed across dozens of corporations, partnerships, and trusts with no obvious connection to the bespectacled comic who had created them.
You remember the time that you wanted me to do Poor Little Rich Girl, and I said that I was grown up and too...
Number 2. Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, with a net worth of $85 million, equivalent to about $1.8 billion today. Mary Pickford projected an image of innocent femininity that bore no resemblance to her shark-like business acumen, an incongruity that allowed her to build one of the largest personal fortunes in Hollywood history while competitors consistently underestimated her. A business historian specializing in early Hollywood explained, Pickford weaponized gender stereotypes. Studio executives and financiers expected a diminutive woman with golden curls to be financially naive. She exploited this expectation mercilessly, often entering negotiations prepared with financial details her male counterparts hadn't even reviewed, giving her an insurmountable advantage. This strategic approach was evident in her groundbreaking 1916 contract with Adolf Zukor's Famous Players, where she secured a then unprecedented $10,000 weekly salary plus half the profits from her films, at a time when most stars earned fixed salaries with no profit participation. An entertainment attorney noted that Famous Players' deal would be exceptional even by today's standards, but it was merely the foundation of her financial empire, not its pinnacle. Pickford's true genius emerged when she moved beyond being merely talent and became an owner of the means of production and distribution. In 1919, Pickford joined with Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and Douglas Fairbanks to form United Artists, a revolutionary company that allowed filmmakers to produce and distribute their own work outside the studio system. A film historian explained, as both talent and one-fourth owner of the distribution company, Pickford captured value at multiple levels of the entertainment ecosystem. She wasn't just earning as a performer anymore, she was profiting from the entire value chain of film, from production through distribution. This vertical integration of her business interests created wealth on a scale unimaginable to performers who remained solely talent. Beyond entertainment, Pickford made extraordinarily prescient investments in California real estate, focusing particularly on commercial properties in areas that would eventually become central business districts. Her most valuable acquisition was a multi-block purchase in Burbank in the early 1920s, land that would later become prime studio-adjacent property worth hundreds of millions. A property developer familiar with her portfolio noted, Pickford approached real estate with remarkable patience. She would hold properties for decades without development, waiting for areas to mature and land values to multiply. She used to say, the best investment is the one you make and then forget you own until someone offers you 20 times what you paid. By her death in 1979, Pickford had accumulated approximately $85 million, equivalent to about $1.8 billion today, a fortune made more impressive by the fact that she built it as a woman in an era when females were routinely excluded from financial decision-making and business ownership. Her biographer observed, her greatest asset was that people continually misread her. They saw the curls and the sweet smile and expected compliance and simplicity. They didn't recognize they were dealing with perhaps the most financially astute mind in Hollywood history until she had already outmaneuvered them.
Where that was said, having resided in Lambeth many years.
Number 1. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, with a net worth of $100 million, equivalent to about $2.1 billion today. Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp character won the hearts of audiences worldwide with his humble appearance and perpetual financial struggles. The supreme irony is that Chaplin himself was building the largest personal fortune in Hollywood history, a financial empire so vast and complex that even decades after his death, researchers continued to discover previously unknown assets and holdings. A business historian who gained access to his private records revealed Chaplin wasn't just the biggest star in the world, he was one of its most brilliant financial strategists. From the very beginning of his film career, he approached compensation and ownership in ways that were decades ahead of industry standards and created exponentially more wealth than anyone thought possible in entertainment. Chaplin's financial acumen was evident as early as 1916 when he signed with Mutual Film Corporation for $670,000 for a single year, equivalent to about $16 million today, an unprecedented sum that made international news. But the true brilliance of this deal wasn't the amount. It was the structure which granted Chaplin complete creative control and ownership of his films after their initial release. An entertainment attorney who studied Chaplin's contracts explained that ownership of intellectual property was revolutionary. While other stars were simply earning salaries for work owned entirely by studios, Chaplin was building a portfolio of film assets that would generate revenue for decades. By the mid-1920s, he had accumulated a library of content that effectively made him his own studio without the overhead costs. This approach culminated in 1919 when Chaplin joined with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith to form United Artists, a company that allowed them to produce and distribute films independently of the major studios. As both creator and distributor, Chaplin captured approximately 90% of the profits from his films, compared to the 5 to 10% that most major stars received. But Chaplin's financial genius extended far beyond film. Beginning in the 1920s, he systematically diversified his wealth into areas completely separated from entertainment, with particular focus on emerging technologies and natural resources. A financial historian noted, Chaplin's non-film investments were extraordinarily forward-thinking. He made early investments in aviation when commercial flight was still considered speculative. He acquired radio patents that would become essential to broadcasting. Most significantly, he invested in oil exploration in the Middle East, decades before most Western investors recognized its potential. His most lucrative investment came through a partnership with an engineer who had developed an improved oil drilling bit. Rather than simply investing in the company, Chaplin structured a deal that paid him royalties on every foot of oil well drilled using this technology, creating a revenue stream that multiplied exponentially as global oil exploration expanded after World War II. By his death in 1977, Chaplin had accumulated approximately $100 million, equivalent to about $2.1 billion today, a fortune made more remarkable by the fact that he had been effectively exiled from the United States, his primary market, for the last 25 years of his life, due to political persecution during the McCarthy era. A tax historian explained, Chaplin's wealth was so carefully structured and globally distributed that even his exile couldn't significantly impact it. He had created a financial architecture that transcended any single market or political environment. While the US government was labeling him a communist, he was quietly operating one of the world's most sophisticated capitalist enterprises. And there you have it, the 13 richest actors of Hollywood's golden age. From Fred Astaire's real estate empire to Charlie Chaplin's $2 billion fortune, these stars weren't just talented performers, they were financial visionaries who built wealth that has largely been forgotten by history. What's most striking about these fortunes is how they were built. These weren't actors who simply collected big paychecks. They were innovators who created entirely new business models, profit participation deals, loan-out corporations, content ownership structures, brand licensing agreements. They invented the financial playbook that every celebrity today still follows, and notice how many of them built their wealth outside of Hollywood entirely. Gary Cooper with his mineral rights, Jimmy Durante with his infrastructure investments, James Stewart with his insurance company stakes. They understood that true wealth comes from diversification, from owning assets that appreciate over time, from creating passive income streams that work even when you're not. The shocking entry at number 3, Harold Lloyd, perfectly illustrates this principle. While his contemporaries Chaplin and Keaton are more remembered today, Lloyd built a bigger fortune than both. By operating in the shadows, financing films, buying agricultural land, and creating a financial empire so secretive that we're still discovering its full extent decades later. And the women on this list, Mary Pickford, Mae West, Barbara Stanwyck, Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, Claudette Colbert, they didn't just overcome the gender discrimination of their era. They weaponized the fact that men underestimated them. They walked into negotiations more prepared than their male counterparts and walked out with better deals. They built billion-dollar fortunes in an era when women weren't even allowed to open bank accounts without their husband's permission. The lesson from all of this, real wealth isn't built from salaries alone. It's built from ownership, owning your content, owning real estate, owning businesses, owning assets that appreciate over time. These Golden Age stars understood this instinctively, and that's why their fortunes were so much more significant than the paychecks earned by today's highest-paid actors. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. First, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. We're uncovering the hidden financial stories of Hollywood's biggest legends, and there's so much more coming. Second, hit that like button if you enjoyed learning about these incredible fortunes. And third, drop a comment telling me which entry surprised you the most. Was it Harold Lloyd at number 3? Mary Pickford's ruthless business tactics? Or maybe Jimmy Durante's billion-dollar infrastructure empire? Thanks for watching, and remember, in Hollywood's golden age, the brightest stars weren't always the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes they were the ones quietly building empires in the shadows.